Welcome back. So this tutorial is really looking at how to make a simple sugar rose. If you're a beginner or haven't just quite mastered roses yet, then this tutorial is for you. Now remember, click and subscribe for more tutorials. I really appreciate the support. Let's take a look at what we need to make this flower. So I have a 4-petal cutter set. My gum paste cone is attached to an 18 gauge florist wire. Now the wire has just been plugged in with some edible glue and the bottom of the fondant twisted around the wire. I leave these to set overnight before using. I'm using Squires Kitchen Florist Paste today, and this sets up really firm very quickly, and when using it I can roll this out uber thin. I have my non-stick rolling pin and ball tools, toothpick and workboard, a soft mat and edible glue, and then a foam pad and an egg carton which I set my petals in. Taking the first petal cutter in your set, or at least the cutter that is the same size as the cone that you've made, we're going to cut 3 of these petals out to start the centre of our rose. This will make up the bud of the rose. I'm using my non-stick board and I've put a little bit of cornstarch down just to make it a lot easier to roll out this gum paste and make sure that it doesn't stick to the board. As you can see, I can roll this one out uber thin, and the thinner you can go, the more realistic your rose will look. But keep an eye on the type of gum paste that you're using, because not all of them are made for rolling out super thin. So if you find it's breaking or it's hard to work with, don't worry about going a little bit thicker with that gum paste. Let's go in and cut out those 3 petals in the smaller size in our set. Just push that nicely and firmly down to make sure we get a really nice clean edge to those petals. And then what I do to make sure that these don't dry out while I'm working on them, because this gum paste in particular sets up super quick, is that I get a tea towel or some cloth and I fold this over once vertically, and then I'll fold it over again horizontally after I've placed my petals underneath. So this is a really nice makeshift way to make sure those petals don't dry out whilst you're working on them. So again, I just fold that over so I have a double layer, and then I take a slightly damp cloth and I put this over the top of that towel as well, just to give it a little bit of moisture, not too much, but just make sure it doesn't dry out. Now we can leave those in there and cut out the next layer of petals. So we have the original cutter that we were using, and now we're going to go for the next size up to do the 3rd layer of petals. I like to cut most of my petals out in advance before I start to layer them and make up the rose, because it just adds a more streamlined process and makes this a lot quicker, which is something I've learned over the years. Let's cut out another 3 of this size petal. Now my cutter's a little bit broken here, so I'm just going to makeshift and hold it together as I'm pressing this down, but hopefully you guys have a brand new cutter set that isn't worn out, and then you can cut this really quickly. And then just kneading the fondant, or the gum paste, sorry, up again to get it nice and warm and pliable. It's very cold here today, -3 degrees, so I find I'm going to have to do this a few times. Just working the gum paste, getting it nice and soft, and we'll roll this out, and then we are going to go in and cut 5 more petals in the larger size petal. So that will be the next one up in your set. And then once we've finally cut out all our petals and they're ready to go, this is going to make the assembly process a lot quicker for you, and it just makes it less tedious. I have been making sugar roses for coming up to 8 years now, and I do find that if I do it this way, it's a lot quicker and I don't get bored so quickly. There we go, we have all our petals ready. I'll place it under my tea towel, put in my little cloth over, and then we can get started on making the first layer of petals and adding these to our central cone. I'm ready to go with my soft mat, my edible glue. Now you can purchase this ready-made, but I'll leave the recipe in the description box below. I have a dry paintbrush, just a very small tip, and that's just to apply my edible glue to the petals. And then we also have the ball tool to soften the edges of the petals, and I'll take you through how to do that. So taking the 3 of the smallest petals that we've made, I'm going to go in and soften the edges. Now you want the ball tool to sit part way on the edge of the petal and halfway on the mat underneath, and you'll put in gentle pressure as you roll that ball around the edge of that petal. Feel free to put your finger in the middle of the petal to stop it from moving around if it is, and you can always add a little bit of cornstarch to the ball tool and dry it off if you find it sticking. But what you see is you get this really beautiful edge, it ruffles and it thins those edges even more when you do this. The more pressure you add, the greater the ruffle you will get, and that's completely down to personal taste, so play around with it as well. Just go in one swoop motion, which I don't always manage to do, but when it works, it's great. And there we go, we've softened those petals and they are ready to be added to our cone. So I'm going to add glue to the very first petal, and I'm going to cover the entire petal with glue, not right to the top. That was a little bit of a mistake that I've made here, but as much of the petal as possible will be covered with this edible glue. And then we're going to take that first petal and we're going to place this right up against the cone with the rounded side at the top and the pointed side towards the bottom of your cone. And then taking the right hand side, we're going to pull that petal all the way around and twist it right into the very tip of the bud. And I'm pressing that in because I don't want to see the white center of my bud. I've curled it all the way around, and then I'm taking the other edge of the petal and pulling this, as you can see here, securing it around to the other side. You can leave it slightly open, or you can close it all the way in. And then we'll take the next petal and we're going to add glue just to the right hand side of that petal. Don't add glue to the other side, and you'll see why here, because what we're going to do is we're going to slide that in to where that opening is, securing it down onto the cone. And then we take the next one and we do exactly the same. So we just add the glue to the right hand side of the petal. This might vary, it might be your left depending on how you curled the first petal round. And then we just tuck that one into there, secure it down onto the cone. And now I can take more glue and close the first door. So I'm just showing you again the positioning so that you get a really good idea of how this works. And I'm going to add a tiny bit of glue just to the very bottom and just press that bottom bit around. So with the next one the same, you just want to do the very bottom of the petal and then twist this bit around and press in the bottom part of the petal onto the cone so that it all secures down. And now you can kind of twist those edges with your fingers to make it look a little bit more realistic. I'll take some styrofoam and I'll just press the white into there so that can set up while we start softening the edges of the next layer. So we have the 3 petals in the next size up, and again I'm doing the same thing as before. I'm taking in my ball tool and I'm just softening that edge. You can see the more pressure that I put down, the more of a curl that I get. And we'll just do exactly the same as before. We're going to soften these and then we're going to add the glue to the edges and start to tuck them in one after another around our rose. Now adding glue just to one side of the rose, this is going to be the right hand side, and what I like to do is turn my roses or my petals in the opposite direction, so I can kind of see the side that needs to be glued and the side that should be open. So it'll be in the direction that I'm holding the rose, if that makes sense. As you can see, this door is slightly open. We just call it a door just to give you the idea of the opening and closing of each petal, and I can slide the first petal into the last opening of the petal with the glue side touching the centre of the rose and the open side still nice and dry until I slide the next petal in. Now I can close that door by adding a little bit of glue just to the bottom edge and secure that over and close that down onto the second petal that I've added. I'll do the same thing again, taking some glue, adding this one in, pressing it down, and then securing the petal before that onto that one's back. And then we want to completely close this center in now, so I'll take that last one and close that down onto the rose. So then we have a really pretty little central bud. And what I like to do is take my index finger, put it into the middle of the petal, and then take my pointing finger and thumb and pinch that down. Just folding those petals backwards and pinching them a little adds a little interest, makes it look more beautiful and gives some movement to that rose. Again, I'll take my styrofoam. We'll plant this in the middle and we will start moving on to the final 5 petals. And what we do with these ones is a little bit different because we're going to allow the larger petals to form in the shape of a cup before adding them to the rose. So I'm softening those edges again. My ball tool is a little bit sticky here. I think a little bit of glue might have gone on there or a bit of moisture from the tea towel. So I can always just go in and clean that up and add a little bit of cornstarch. Now I'm taking my rolling pin and just pressing down the middle of the petal. You don't have to do this. I just find it helps to start the curve off and soften it a little. And once we've done that, we're going to take our petal former and just press that down so that it sets up really nicely and gives us a little bit of a curve. It will make more sense when you see the visual and when you see this added to the rose. But I'm going to put all 5 of my petals in here and leave them for about 10 minutes. We don't want them to be bone dry, but we do want them to be firm and hold that shape that we're trying to form. So I'll go in with my other petals and we'll soften all of these and do exactly the same thing. So you can see my ball tool is a little bit sticky here. I'm going to go in and just add a bit of cornstarch and just clean this up a bit so that it doesn't keep sticking to my petals. Try not to get too much cornstarch on the actual petals, that's a mistake I made, but just for the point of this tutorial, I'm not too worried here. So it's the same method as before, half on the mat, half on the petal, and softening these, and then we're going to set these up in our petal former or on our soft mat with a little bit of a curve. And I can list all the tools and everything in the description below as well if you need to purchase any of these items. So about 15 to 10 minutes, these should be set. They should have a nice little curve when I pick them up, but they still need to be a little bit pliable and flexible. Again, this will really be determined by the type of gum paste or sugar paste that you are using. So it's a little bit of trial and error. Now these have been setting up for a while, and look at that, you've got this really beautiful curve and they don't flop down, they stay in that position, and that's exactly what we want. We just wanted these to sit up and form so that when we attach them to the center of our rose, they will have that nice little curve where they sit slightly outwards. And again, you'll see this as we start attaching it to that central bud. So let's lay all these out now, and we're going to get our little rose that's been setting up nicely, waiting patiently to be finished. And then I'm going to go in and I'm going to add glue to both edges now of the bottom of these petals. So let's just flip these round And then remember, don't go all the way to the top with the glue. Oh, sorry, actually, I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm just going to add it to the right hand side. And then we will actually slide those in as we did before. There's so many different techniques and ways in which you can make a rose, and that is what this series is about. So I'm starting off with a basic rose for you guys, and then I will start to show you how you can really change the look and style of these roses depending on how you position those petals. And a very slight change in the positioning will make a massive difference. So looking where you added that last petal, there might be a slight bit of an opening, or it might be closed, not to worry. Just position the next petal into that gap. So we're just overlapping that. And now we want to kind of make sure that we are covering as much of the white and the bottom of that rose or central bud as possible. So again, I'll just start adding one and then sliding the next one in. And this is really important. You must just pinch the very bottom of these roses. So I'll add a little bit of glue, close the first one down onto the second one that I've added, but make sure that when you're pinching these down, you are just pinching the bottom and securing them and not pressing your finger dead into the middle of that petal, because you're just going to take away that lovely little curve that we've just formed. So again, I'm just sliding this one in, adding a little bit of glue, pressing that one down to close the door, just as we've done with the previous layer of petals. And then again, we'll slide the next layer in and press that one down, closing that door. And then we will finish this off with the last petal. So gluing the previous one down, shutting that door, and then here we can secure this last petal. Now you'll probably have to dry this upside down now. We'll probably have to hang this upside down to make sure those petals don't flop down. But this is our third layer of petals. And then we're going to go in and doing a very similar technique as before in forming the larger petals, but we'll add a little bit of a curl to each side to make it more interesting and just really finish that rose off. So let's dry that, taking your wire and making a little hook so that we can hang it somewhere upside down, and we'll get moving on to the next layer of petals. So for the final layer, you're going to need a tool such as a toothpick. We'll take the last cutter in our set, which is the largest petal cutter, and we're going to cut 5 to 7 petals. So I'm taking my ball tool, and again, halfway on the mat and halfway off. Now, my ball tool was a little bit sticky here, there's a bit of moisture, so I'm just going to clean that up. And don't worry as well about little imperfections like this, it kind of just adds to the realism of the rose. And then I'm taking my rolling pin, and again, this was a little bit sticky. I think the petal picked up a tiny bit of moisture from the tea towel, and I'm kind of just rolling that down too, just to kind of help with that curve and thinning the petal out. Now, taking my toothpick at an angle, we're going to just roll one edge of that petal over the back of the toothpick and then slide the toothpick out. And I'll show you this a few times up close. So we're going diagonal on the other side of the petal, and then just taking the very corner, rolling that over, twisting it, and then sliding the toothpick out. So then what happens is you get this really cool little curve, and we can pinch that in, and that's how you get that effect on those petals. And I'll just take an egg carton, and we'll just pop that in there and let it sit so it forms up. So I'll carry on and do this with the rest of my petals. Just softening those edges and then adding that curl. And of course, if you want, you can go ahead and use a rose veiner to give an impression to each of your petals when you're making these roses. On the next tutorial that I'll be uploading, I'll show you how to use these veiners with a different style of rose. So just showing you up close again, just twisting that over the side of the rose and doing the same on the other side to give you a nice little curl. And then let's just pinch that in. And remember, just work on your petals just 1 to 2 at a time, especially if you're using the Squires Kitchen Forest paste, because it does set up so fast. If you have a paste that gives you a little bit more work time, then you could probably do 3 or 4 at a time, leaving them out if they're not going to dry out too quickly. I'm just going to curl this over again. And I always suggest using a florist Mexican paste or a gum paste, which they all just have different terminologies depending where you are in the world. But when you start trying to use like sugar paste and fondant, it's so soft. It's almost like trying to make flowers out of Play-Doh, so it can just be a little tricky. It's definitely doable, but it's just not something that I would recommend. So we're going to make 7 of these, and that should be enough to finish the rose. So they set up for about 10 minutes. Again, they have that nice little curve that doesn't seem to be flopping down. They're holding their shape, and that's the most important thing. So you don't want them hard and brittle, we just want them to hold their shape but still have a little bit of flexibility in them so that we can start to stick these to the rose. And then I'm going to take my edible glue and I'm just going to add the glue to the bottom of the petal in a V shape. So again, not all the way up the edge of the petal, just that kind of very bottom bit so that it secures down nicely. And you don't want to be overly generous with the glue because then it might cause them to slide off too much, but you do want to make sure there's enough on there so that it does stick. You see there's still a little bit of flexibility in that, but they are holding their shape. Now this is going to be easier to work on this upside down rather than it facing you, and this time I'm not going to overlap each petal, we're just going to apply them as we go around, so you don't have to leave an opening, we're just going to stick them straight on and then add the next one over that one. So making sure that we're going right down to that bottom and covering up the white area on the bud that we've made, and make sure again you press the very bottom and don't pinch down in the center. You want to keep that lovely curve that we've just made, so just pinching the very bottom, just pinching where you've applied the glue. And then halfway across the back of the next petal, we'll add the 3rd layer. And again, we just keep overlapping these very slightly, then applying the next one. And just pinching it right on the bottom. And then that final one we can probably just tuck in where there's a little bit of an opening, but if there isn't, then you can just stick that straight down onto the final 2. You just secure that all down, and I will show you for the purpose of this video, but it is a good idea just to be patient and leave it upside down to dry before you do look at the finished result. But once all set up for about 12 hours, this should be your finished rose. And of course you can make this bigger by adding more petals around the edge if you go up a size in your cutter set, or you can leave it just like that. For more tutorials, hit subscribe and hit that notification bell, because I'm going to do an entire series on sugar roses this year, and I just can't wait to see you guys there. So thank you so much for watching, and good luck with making those beautiful flowers.